that kind of explains, I think, why we have these areas like Yonghe, which are still chaotic to a certain degree. Of course, it's changing. The city is getting more and more livable. We've got Dusan now, so you do actually have to go in front of a committee for significant architecture to make sure that it works in that area.
It's interesting you mentioned about a country looking at itself and trying to define itself architecturally.
Well, Taiwan is doing that at the moment. That's really interesting how a culture develops. I mean, I'm coming from the UK. We don't have 30-story buildings in the UK. One thing I could say about Taiwan, people are brilliant here. 一光头啊，就是坏人或是和尚。你是哪一个？
Do you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
My name's Clive Evely. I'm British. My background is architecture, interior design, and structural engineering. I came to Taiwan in 1989. I saw an ad in a design magazine. I went for the interview, and they said the job was in Taiwan. And at the time, I didn't even know where Taiwan was. So they sent me out here for 1 week. I mean, this place was crazy. It was like a scene from the Scott's Blade Runner. It wasn't always raining, and it wasn't always dark, you know. But, I mean, it was more about the noise and the smells and the people, which was all so new to me. In Chinese, we say, "je now," you know. I mean, it was so different to London. Planning laws in the UK were not allowed to have stores and residential areas together. It was very different here. People were living and working in their front rooms. Shops were 24 hours. So there was just this kind of frenzy and the chaos and the smells, the stinky tofu,
Yeah, there it's all over.
which I had a guy living right outside me.
Yeah, ugh,
That was
horrid.
tough.
Taiwan back in 1989, like, wasn't the Fangbian nice place that it is today?
You know, in 1989, you couldn't get a cup of coffee. I went out and they said, "What do you want to drink?" And I said, "I'll have a cup of coffee." And they all kind of look, you know.
Whoa.
Because it was really expensive.
What was navigating life like in the first couple of years without Chinese back then?
There were no English signs in those days. I used to have a little motorbike. And one day I just went somewhere and I just was completely lost because I couldn't read the signs. I didn't know which direction to go in. I was absolutely petrified. And you don't have a cell phone. And luckily I found somebody who spoke English who pointed you in the right direction. A buddy of mine came from the UK, and in my very broken Chinese, I said he doesn't eat meat. They brought him a tray of intestines cooked in blood. You know the dish, right?
Yeah.
Even I was freaked out. It wasn't too bad because I was working so hard that I was basically home office.
Nightclub.
It was brilliant for that because the nightlife here at that time was left over from the Vietnam vets. In those days, we weren't allowed to get working visas. 我跟那个英国公司的合约是3个月，他已经更新第3次，所以我已经在这里9个月。我就跟他说，那你要付一个中文老师给我。因为我已经超过9个月，我没有中文，怎么可能？我在那个公司有一个老师，他是 simultaneous translator， 他就是用 Bopomofo， 是蛮特别，因为你在国外你也没有办法找到老师用 Bopomofo， 是比较准的中文。
你觉得你要学多久可以在工作上用中文
？1年开始可以去餐厅，可以玩 ，Yeah。可以讲，可以跟计程车师傅讲，我好好玩哦。其实我刚来的时候，我上一个计程车，那个 driver 就说：“先生，你知道我们台湾就有2种跟着你一样的。”我说：“什么意思？剃光头啊，就是坏人或是和尚哦。”你是哪一个？
他就在问你，
我就说阿弥陀佛，是不是我很奇怪？我不知道。我每天起来的时候，我要看我是戴哪一个头，是讲英文的头，还是讲中文的头。有的时候你就中文就是没有办法讲，或是英文没有办法讲。其实我在这里那么久，我讲英文也很困扰。我讲中文是小孩的中文，所以我就忘了，我就完蛋，我就什么都不能讲。Coming here, obviously, communication is different. When to talk. When to argue, when to let it go. And if a client ever says to you, it's bad feng shui,
it's done.
You know it's a redesign. Not always can they put their finger on what they don't like, but they don't like something. Bad feng shui would become the easiest way to explain to me.
You don't get it, white boy. Sorry. What were some of your first projects here?
So I went to work for a local guy. He was an ex-movie star from Macau. Virtually the first day I started there, he gave me this project, which was a 30-story tower in Taichung. I mean, I'm coming from the UK. We don't have 30-story buildings in the UK. In fact, at that time, there were no 30-story buildings in Taipei. So I put together a concept for this without any knowledge of how the process would work and how it would be constructed. I'm sorry to say it wasn't my best work.
It's the first craft. It can't be that good.
And I'll never forget that many years later, I had an opportunity to do another building in Taichung. The boss of the company's office was looking at the building which I had designed previously. And he sat me down in his office one day. He just said to me,
there's your thing.
Please promise me our building won't look like that one. 34 years has flown by. There was a moment just after I got married, after I had my son when he was 2 years old. We had a situation with China where they started lobbing missiles over Taiwan, and all the media came here, and my mum was on the phone like, oh, it's the World War in Taiwan, you know. Yeah. And it made me think about how vulnerable we were. So we actually emigrated to Canada, but actually I came back for my wife's sister's wedding, but ended up working back in Mr. Wong's office for 2 weeks, working on a big shopping mall. And that was fun. Obviously the salary was much better here. It was a no-brainer, really. So we moved back. I decided I wasn't going to work in the same way I'd been working before, which was working at a frantic pace, carrying about 16 interior projects, but also probably about 10 to 12 architectural projects, and these were big. So I made a promise to myself and to my boss, which was I was going to do more careful work, but also I was going to teach. Teaching blew me away. It gave me exposure to these brilliant students, these brilliant people, super creative, wonderful people. And one thing I could say about Taiwan, people are brilliant here. The people that I am lucky enough to have taught and worked with and generally call my friends. Oh my God, 成就感.
Yeah.
Really satisfying.
Just to be able to facilitate the next generation of young Taiwanese architects.
Yeah. I said at the beginning of my course to my students, I'm not a parent, I'm a student too. We are learning together. I know there's this great respect between the youngers and the elders here, and especially the relationship between the student and the teacher. Yeah. But I didn't want that. I didn't want somebody to be shy to come and talk to me. We were all in it together. And I was giving them programs which I had no idea where they were going, because I would get bored too, and because technology had moved. So I was constantly redesigning the programs.
I think there's kind of a misunderstanding from a lot of foreigners that come over here, especially when they go to traditional neighborhoods. They look around, they're like, why are there bars in the windows or these signs? This is just ugly.
I think context is important. When the Kuomintang came back here in 1945 after the end of World War II, as far as they were concerned, China belonged to them, and they were going back. So this was a temporary move. In 1950, there were 5 million people in Taipei, and today's 24 million. That's about 300,000 a year. I mean,
huge.
Yeah, right?
Huge
so
growth.
That's like an explosion of humanity. And it goes out on the streets. People are living in a very dense situation on top of each other. You don't know them because you're all new. You're going to be worried about thieves and things, so you're going to put the steel cages. And if you're here temporarily, you probably don't really care about creating really good architecture. The city really just happened. There was no planning as such, and nobody's controlling, so you put another building up on the roof, and sometimes you put another building on top of that, you know. Nobody's controlling this. So, of course, you're using the cheapest materials you can find, which is all this gampan. And then you've got orange one and a green one and a blue one next to a black one or a white one. It's like a Yola place, right? A theme park, you know. But when the lights come on at night, it's magical, right? And I think that Taipei has that kind of thing because people are out at night. The street markets are at night. That kind of explains, I think, why we have these areas like Yonghe, which are still chaotic to a certain degree. Of course, it's changing. The city is getting more and more livable. We've got Dusan now, so you do actually have to go in front of a committee for significant architecture to make sure that it works in that area.
It's interesting you mentioned about a country looking at itself and trying to define itself architecturally.
Well, Taiwan is doing that at the moment. That's really interesting how a culture develops. You could say unsophisticated and copying the West. The easy status, the symbol of a couple of Greek columns and a portico, it's too easy, right? When the Romans and the Greeks were building, they were building future architecture. Otherwise, it'd be a mud hut or something like that. Right? So they become sophisticated, then becoming comfortable with their culture, and then taking their culture into the future. And that's really exciting. That's probably where we are now. And so when you talk about what is Taiwan culture, what is the history of Taiwan in modern contemporary architecture, when you see something, you'll know it because it's not something necessarily copied from the West. Or maybe it is, but it fits in its environment. And it could just be a collection of white boxes, but it's right. It functions. It looks good. Is that Taiwanese? No, but it's made by a Taiwanese architect on a Taiwanese site. So yes, it's Taiwanese. I was always aware that a lot of wealthy people's children were going to the best universities in the US and Europe. But for many years, a lot didn't come back. But now they're coming back because they see the opportunities here. And so there's some very, very talented architects here now, local architects. I'm really optimistic and I'm really happy to hand the torch.
So do you feel like you're going to be staying here in the indefinite future?
I already have my tomb.
Really?
A nice view looking right down there.
You already got your plot. You're here forever then.